The birch tree at the edge of my driveway had already dropped most of its leaves by the time my daughter-in-law called. I remember that detail because I had been standing at the kitchen window with my second cup of coffee, watching the last yellow ones let go, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up, her name on the screen. "Did you receive the invoice I sent over?" she said. "No hello. No good morning, Raymond. Just that." I told her I had received it. "The equipment supplier needs confirmation by end of week," she said. "We're behind on the payment schedule." I said I understood. I told her I would look at it that afternoon. She hung up. I set the phone down and looked back at the birch tree. The last few leaves were still holding on. I thought about how strange it was that a person could call to ask about money and not once ask how you were doing. Not once, after everything. My name is Raymond Calloway. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the city of Sudbury, and when I retired 3 years ago, I had a pension, a paid-off house on Lorne Street, and what I believed was a solid relationship with my son. His name is Daniel. He is 36. He married a woman named Priya 7 years ago, and for most of those 7 years, things between us were what I would call functional. Not warm, not the relationship I had imagined, but functional. We had Sunday dinners a few times a year. We talked on the phone. I attended the things I was invited to, and I invested in his dream. That is the part of this story I have to explain carefully, because I want to be honest about my own role in how it unfolded. Daniel had wanted to open a physiotherapy clinic since his late 20s. He had the credentials, the drive, the vision. What he did not have, for a long time, was the capital. His wife worked in marketing for a mid-size firm downtown, and together they were comfortable, but not in a position to absorb the startup costs of a full clinical operation, leasehold improvements, medical-grade equipment, staffing, liability insurance, the first year of operating costs before a patient base could grow. He had approached 2 banks. Both had offered partial financing with terms he found difficult to manage alongside their existing mortgage. He came to me in the spring 2 years ago. He sat at my kitchen table with a folder of documents, a business plan, projected revenue, equipment lists, lease terms for a space he had already identified on LaSalle Boulevard. He walked me through it, page by page. He was thorough and composed, and I could see in the way he held that folder that this mattered to him more than he wanted to let on. I asked my questions. I took the folder home. I spent 2 weeks going through it, running the numbers myself, the way an engineer does not with optimism, but with margins and contingencies. And then I said yes. The amount was $290,000. That was the figure he needed to bridge the gap between bank financing and full operational readiness. It was a significant portion of my savings, not all of it, but enough that I felt the weight of the decision every time I thought about it. I had set that money aside over decades of careful living. I drove the same truck for 11 years. I did not take expensive vacations. I brought my lunch to work in a cooler bag until the day I retired. I gave it to Daniel because I believed in what he was building, and because he was my son, and because I thought that counted for something in both directions. We did not sign a formal agreement. That was my mistake. I know that now. He had mentioned at the kitchen table that evening that we could put something in writing if I wanted, and I had waved it off. I told him we were family. I told him I trusted him. He nodded, and I thought the nod meant the same thing to him that it meant to me. I transferred the money in 2 installments over the following month. After that, things changed in ways I could not immediately name. Daniel had always been a man who kept his own counsel quiet, self-contained, the kind of person who did not volunteer information unless asked directly. I had always accepted that about him. But after the transfer, the distance between us became something different. Calls that used to come every week or two started arriving once a month, then less. When I did reach him, the conversations were brief and surface level. He was busy, he said. The clinic build-out was consuming everything. I understood that. I had managed large municipal projects. I knew what it meant to be in the middle of a construction phase with contractors, inspectors, and timelines all pressing at once. I gave him room. His wife was the one who called when there were financial updates. She was organized and precise about it, invoices forwarded by email, payment amounts clearly noted, deadlines specified. There was never any warmth in those messages, but I told myself that was simply her way. Some people separate business from personal. I tried to respect that. What I did not notice, or perhaps chose not to notice, was that I was being managed. The months passed. The build-out progressed, from what I could gather through the sparse updates I received. New flooring, the reception desk installed, equipment arriving in stages. I asked once, in a text to Daniel, whether I might come by and see the space. He said sure, he would let me know when a good time was. He never followed up on that. By early fall, I had a feeling I could not fully articulate something between unease and a grief I had no clear reason to claim. I was not being lied to, as far as I knew. I was simply being kept at a distance from something I had made possible. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in October, I ran into an acquaintance at the grocery store, a man named Phil Arsenault, who had done some contracting work on my basement years ago and still occasionally crossed my path around the city. He was a friendly, talkative man, the kind who remembers everything about everyone and shares it without filtering. He stopped his cart in the bread aisle and said, "Hey, congratulations on your son's place. My wife and I drove past it last week. Looks great. You must be proud." I looked at him. "The clinic on LaSalle," he said. "The sign's up and everything. We saw people going in." I kept my expression level. I told Phil it was coming along well. I said I was glad the sign looked good. I asked him how his wife was doing. We talked for another 3 minutes, and then went our separate ways. I pushed my cart to the end of the aisle, and stood there for a moment looking at the shelf, without seeing any of it. The clinic was open. It was already open. People were going in. I drove home and called Daniel. He let it ring through to voicemail. I texted him. "Just heard the clinic is open. Is that right? Why didn't you tell me?" He did not reply that evening. He called back the following morning, and the conversation was short. "Yes," he said. They had done a soft opening a few weeks ago. Things had been hectic. He had meant to call. He was sorry for not being in touch sooner. I asked about a grand opening. He said they had held a small event for family and close friends. I said, "I wasn't there, Daniel." A pause. "It was a small thing," he said. "Priya handled most of the planning. It kind of came together quickly." I asked him when it had been. He told me it was 5 weeks ago. I was quiet for a moment. 5 weeks. The clinic I had funded with nearly $300,000 of my retirement savings had opened, held a celebration, welcomed family and close friends, and I had heard about it from a contractor I barely knew in the bread aisle of a grocery store. 5 weeks later, I told Daniel I would like to come by and see the space. He said he would check the schedule and get back to me. He did not get back to me. His wife called 2 days later to ask if I had reviewed the most recent invoice. I told her I had. She said the payment was needed by end of the week for the massage therapy table that had arrived in the most recent equipment delivery. I said, "I wasn't at the opening." She said, "Sorry?" "The grand opening," I said. 5 weeks ago. I wasn't there." She said, "It was only close family and a few colleagues. We kept it very small." I asked who was there. She listed her parents, her brother and his wife, 2 colleagues of Daniel's from his previous clinic, a neighbor. I said, "I'm his father. I invested $290,000 in that clinic." She said, "Raymond, it wasn't about the investment. It was a personal gathering." I did not raise my voice. I want to be clear about that. I am 64 years old, and I have been in enough difficult rooms, budget reviews, project disputes, conversations where someone across the table is telling you something that does not add up to know that losing your composure is the fastest way to lose the conversation. I told her I understood. I said I would review the invoice, and then I sat down at my kitchen table and I began, for the first time, to look at things differently. I went back through every email she had forwarded, every invoice, every payment confirmation, every message related to the clinic. I printed them out and laid them on the table in chronological order, the way I used to map a project timeline. I am an engineer by training and by nature. When something does not make sense, I do not react. I organize. What I found, when I organized, was a gap. In late August, a payment had been made from a numbered company I did not recognize. The company appeared in the CC line of one invoice confirmation, as though someone had been copied in error. The invoice was for audio-visual equipment screens for the waiting area, a sound system for the treatment rooms. The amount was $41,000. I had not been asked to fund that particular purchase. The numbered company had paid it. I noted the company number and said nothing for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I made a few inquiries. I have a friend from my years at the city, a man named Gordon Wheatley, who spent 20 years in municipal finance before moving to private consulting. Gordon knows his way around corporate registries and financial structures in a way I do not. I asked him, casually, over coffee, whether he could tell me anything about a numbered company if I gave him the number. He looked it up that same afternoon. He called me from his car. "Raymond," he said, "that company is registered to Priya." I asked him to confirm that. He confirmed it. The company had been registered 14 months ago, well before the clinic opened. It had a single director. Her name. I thanked Gordon and told him I would explain more when I could. He asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. I told him I just needed to think. I went for a long walk that evening, down Lawrence Street to the waterfront trail, along the path that follows the edge of the lake. It was a cold night, clear, and the water was very still. I walked for an hour and a half without music and without my phone. I was not thinking about money, exactly. I was thinking about the moment at the kitchen table 2 years earlier, when Daniel had laid out his folder and I had asked my questions and believed that the answers were complete. I was thinking about the wave of the hand, my wave, my words. We're family. I trust you. I was thinking about how trust, when it is offered without structure, becomes something a person can walk through like an open door, and how the person walking through may not even think of it as taking something. They may think of it as simply moving forward. That thought was not comforting, but it was clarifying. The following week, I asked Daniel to meet me for coffee. I chose a place on Elm Street I had been going to for years, a small, plain shop with good coffee and no background music, the kind of place where a conversation can be heard clearly and remembered. He came in looking tired. He had the slightly guarded expression I had learned to recognize over the years, the look he got when he expected something difficult. He ordered an Americano and sat across from me. I had my folder on the table, not a large one, just a manila envelope with the printed emails, the invoice with the numbered company's appearance, and a single page of notes in my own handwriting. I did not open it immediately. I asked him how the clinic was going. He said it was going well. Patient volume was building. He was hoping to bring on a second physiotherapist within 6 months. I told him I was glad to hear it. Then I slid the envelope across the table. "I found something when I was reviewing the invoices," I said. "I'd like you to explain it to me." He looked at the envelope but did not open it right away. "The numbered company," I said, "registered to Priya. 14 months ago." He picked up his coffee cup, set it down. He did not look surprised in the way a person looks surprised when they have no idea what you are talking about. He looked like someone who had been waiting for a particular door to open and was now watching it swing. "She set that up for tax purposes," he said. I asked him what tax purposes required a separately registered company to make equipment purchases for a clinic that was supposed to be solely in his name. He did not answer right away. I said, "Daniel, I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm here because I put nearly $300,000 into this clinic based on what you showed me at my kitchen table, and I need to understand what I'm actually invested in." He was quiet for a long time. The coffee shop was nearly empty. At that hour, a woman working on a laptop near the window. The barista restocking behind the counter. He said, "She handles the business structure. I handle the clinical side." I said, "Is your name the only name on the clinic's primary operating account?" He hesitated. "Is it?" I said. He said, "There are 2 accounts." I asked who held signing authority on the second account. He looked at the table. I said his name once, quietly. He said, "Both of us." I sat back. Outside the window, a truck rolled past on Elm Street. A woman in a red coat walked a dog along the opposite sidewalk. Ordinary Thursday afternoon in Sudbury. Everything exactly as it always looked. I asked Daniel directly, had he known, when he came to my kitchen table, that there was a plan for a second account? He said no. He said the second account had been set up later, for operational reasons, and that it had become something he did not fully understand and had not managed to address. I believed part of that. I believed that Daniel had not come to my table with a scheme already drawn up. I believed he was a man who had allowed something to grow alongside his dream without fully examining it, because examining it would have required a confrontation he did not want to have. I understood that impulse. I had not always been good at confrontation either, but understanding something is not the same as accepting it. I told him I needed 3 things. First, I wanted a full accounting of every dollar from the $290,000, where it had gone, what it had paid for, what remained. Second, I wanted to meet with a lawyer, together, to formalize a proper investment agreement with clear terms of repayment or equity. Third, I wanted my name on the record as an investor, not hidden in the background. On the record, he nodded slowly. I said, if those three things happen, I'll consider the situation workable. If they don't, I'll need to involve my own lawyer and go from there. He said, I'll talk to Priya. I said, that's fine. But Daniel, this is between you and me. I'm not negotiating with your wife. You came to my kitchen table. You asked me. This is between us. Something moved across his face. It was not quite shame and not quite relief. It was the expression of a man who had been standing in two places at once for a long time and had just been told, quietly, that he had to choose. He said, okay, Dad. Those were the first words in 2 years that sounded the way they used to. The accounting took 3 weeks. It came back mostly clean, not entirely, but mostly. The $41,000 from the numbered company had gone toward equipment that was, in fact, in the clinic and functioning. There was no missing money in the sense of outright theft. What there was a structure that had been built around my investment without my knowledge, a structure that gave Priya signing authority over a portion of the clinic's financial operations in a way I had never agreed to and never been told about. When I met with the lawyer Daniel had retained, I brought Gordon along as my financial advisor. The lawyer was professional and careful. The agreement we arrived at documented my investment as a formal loan to the clinic, with a repayment schedule over 8 years and an interest rate below market but above zero. My name appeared in the agreement 4 times. I have a signed copy in the filing cabinet in my home office, and a digital copy stored in 2 locations. His wife was not in the room for that meeting. I have not had a significant conversation with her since. In the months that followed, Daniel and I found our way back to something. Not everything. Some things, once shifted, do not fully return to where they were. But he called more regularly. He invited me to the clinic, not for an occasion, just a quiet afternoon when he showed me around the space, the treatment rooms, the equipment, the waiting area with its screens. It was a good clinic. I could see that. It was the thing he had said it would be. I stood in the doorway of the main treatment room and looked around, and I felt something complicated that I will not try to reduce to a single word. Before I left, he said, I should have had you there at the opening, Dad. That wasn't right. I said, no, it wasn't. He nodded. I did not tell him it was fine, because it was not entirely fine, and I am too old to say things are fine when they are not. But I told him I was glad we were here now, and that was true. There are things I have thought about since, sitting at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the birch tree come back in spring and drop its leaves again in fall. I think about the moment I waved my hand and said we did not need a written agreement because we were family. I have turned that moment over more times than I can count, and what I have come to understand is this. A formal agreement between people who trust each other is not a sign that the trust is insufficient. It is a sign that the trust is worth protecting. It says, I take this seriously enough to put it in writing. I respect you enough to be clear. The absence of structure does not create closeness. It creates ambiguity. And ambiguity is what the people around you will fill with their own interests. Not always out of malice, but out of the simple human tendency to do what is convenient when no one has made the inconvenient things explicit. I think about what it means to give to someone you love. I gave to Daniel out of love, that is true, but love without accountability is not generosity. It is exposure. Real generosity, the kind that sustains both the giver and the receiver, comes with clarity. Here is what I am offering. Here is what I expect in return. Here is how we will handle it if things become difficult. That conversation feels uncomfortable before it happens, and essential after. I think about Daniel, and about the particular difficulty of being a man who is trying to hold together a marriage, and a business, and a relationship with a parent, and a sense of his own integrity, all at once. I do not excuse what happened, but I understand that he was not simply a villain in this story. He was a man who made a series of small choices in the direction of avoidance, and those small choices accumulated into something large and damaging. I have made my own versions of those choices over the years. Most people have. The difference is whether you are willing, at some point, to stop avoiding and face the room. He faced the room. slowly and imperfectly, but he did. And I think about what I would say to another father in the position I was in, sitting across from a son with a folder full of dreams and a request for help. I would say, give if you can. Give generously. Your child's success is one of the great joys available to a parent, and if you have the means to make it possible, that is a profound gift. But write it down, not because you doubt your child, because the world around your child will test the limits of what was and was not said, and the only protection against that is clarity that exists on paper, signed, with both of your names. Money can be repaid. Clarity, once lost, is much harder to recover. The birch tree is bare again this morning. The coffee is good. Daniel called last night to tell me his clinic has been nominated for a regional small business award. He sounded genuinely pleased, the way he used to sound when he was younger, and things were going well. I told him that was worth celebrating. He said he would save me a seat.